Good afternoon. Everyone can hear me? Yes, fantastic. Well, welcome to this panel about raising capital in the MENA region. As we well know, the last decade has seen a massive transformation in this region when it comes to venture capital and the startup ecosystem. We're seeing more deals being struck between VCs and startups. We're seeing more funding. We're seeing more funds being set up. And of course, there's a lot of other things at play here. We have sovereign wealth funds seeding more funds here. We also have lots of policies being put in place in terms of attracting talent, supporting startups, enabling them to scale a lot further. But at the same time, the region's not without its challenges. Just one data point to frame our discussion. If you look at Magnet data, venture capital investment in terms of value last year dropped year on year by 29%. So more deals being struck, but the value is actually falling. So there's some elements to unpack here. And we're very lucky to have a panel full of investors and advisors to unpack this a little bit further. I'm going to give them all a chance just to briefly introduce themselves so you know what perspective they're coming from. So Zainab, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Zainab Al-Sharif, partner at Plus VC. We invest in startups based in the MENA region. Early stage, pre-seed to pre-A. Our sweet spot is seed stage. Sector agnostic as long as it's backed by tech or tech-enabled. And yeah, if there's any founders in the room, please apply through our website, plus.vc. We like to see great founders, like you mentioned earlier, talent. Yeah, that's about us.
Please.
Pleasure to meet everybody. I'm Akmal Saleem, managing partner of Qatar Financial. We primarily advise venture capital funds raising capital from family offices in Saudi Arabia as LPs into funds, and also support transactions within the fintech space.
And good afternoon. My name is Alexander Wiedmer. I'm the co-managing partner of Rasmal Ventures. We're a fund management company set up in Qatar. In fact, with a fund vehicle also set up in Qatar. We invest a little bit later than Plus VC, mostly pre-Series A, Series A, also tech agnostic.
Fantastic. So I've talked about this evolution. Let's hear a little bit of an explanation how you guys have viewed the evolution in the region in terms of venture capital. Zainab, let me come to you first. How do you think the MENA ecosystem has evolved? Are there particular countries that are advancing at different stages? How does the ecosystem look from where you sit?
Yeah, sure. So it has evolved. It has evolved ever since. So I've been in this space for almost 7 or 8 years. So I have seen the changes, especially at this stage between pre-seed to pre-series A. It has evolved in terms of we've seen a lot of ups and downs. So we saw in 2021, for example, at some point we got a pitch deck with just an idea and the valuation was ridiculous. It was like 20 million valuation just for an idea. And then we started to see that in different countries, valuations started to go up, especially in the UAE. And then with time, as things changed, it started to adjust in the markets between UAE and Saudi specifically. During the pandemic as well, we started to see a lot of companies that were actually thriving and a lot of companies that were suffering. So we started to see a lot of companies, especially in the health tech space and e-commerce space, that were thriving. Typically for us, like what we see within the pre-seed to pre-A stage, an average valuation of 7 million, not more, between both, which makes sense. But obviously it varies between markets, sectors, so this trend keeps on changing as we go, and I'm excited to see how things will evolve in the next few years, especially with a lot of things happening now in the region, not only locally, but we're starting to see a lot of international, institutional, and founders looking at the region and expanding here as well.
Alex, I want to come to you. You've also co-founding Rasmal. You're also an investor in the region. How have you seen this evolution over time? Is it the same at maybe later stages? Where have you seen things change across the region?
Yeah, so I have been in the region quite a long time. I came here in 2013, so things have changed quite a bit since then. But I want to back up a little bit more. So I actually started in my VC career in the year 2000 in Europe. And back then, actually, venture capital started in Europe in the 80s, so it wasn't that old. And when I was, joining a firm and learning the business. So, for example, warrants weren't written into French law yet. You couldn't use warrants yet in deals, and so preference shares were something that were just coming onto the market, and entrepreneurs were learning about ratchet clauses, a very favorite topic of entrepreneurs. So it was just the beginning. And then when I came here to the region, it was like rewinding and restarting, you know, about 10 years before. And so I started interacting with Saudi entrepreneurs. We were managing a fund at the time called STC Ventures, which was the first corporate venture fund of Saudi Telecom. And at that time, I remember interacting with founders, so 2013, 2012, and you know, we would say, well, we really like what you've done so far. We like your business. You know, we'd really like to invest. And many of them would say, great, so I'll pay you back as soon as I can. And we'd be like, no, you're not going to pay us back. We're going to sell your company. And they would say, well, what do you mean? You're not going to sell my company. It's my company. So, you know, it was starting to kind of explain the you know, the typical deal structure of VC. And so what's interesting is if you look at the cycle, let's say how quickly Europe has evolved into the way the Americans do VC took about 20 years. The region took way, way less. So the pace of acceleration is astounding. And so in those 10, 12 years that I've been in the region, I mean, I've seen what I just described compared to today, where you have sophisticated entrepreneurs that are homegrown or coming back to start their companies. And you have more and more funds, as you said, Alex. You have sovereign funds that are fueling VC. And you have a proper ecosystem. There are still issues, there are still gaps to fix. But you have a good ecosystem in the region now.
So there we go. Rapid evolution. We're seeing exciting things happening at the seed stage across different verticals. Let's come to you now, Akmal. I mean, obviously most of your experience has been in Saudi, the biggest market in the region. How has the venture ecosystem evolved there? Are you seeing different dynamics there compared to some of the other countries we've been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been fortunate to be in the Middle East from a perspective that a Saudi family actually invested into my company from the UK around 13, 14 years ago. So I actually came as somebody who was invested into. I grew the company in Saudi and then sold it. And that's when I started advising families and in the VC space and supporting them. And so seeing the evolution has been interesting from my perspective, because in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of fund available, but people can't access it as easily as maybe people think. And that's because there's an immaturity to certain Saudi investors, which is normal, and that's part of the process of, as Alex was talking about, in terms of the evolution of the ecosystem. But it's also because there's an immaturity from the founders' perspectives who are coming to actually come and seek capital. So this has been a very interesting kind of clash point on both sides, whether a fund's investing or not. I think the most important and distinct change or point when it comes to Saudi versus the other markets in the GCC is that the influence of family capital is very, very significant. And that has to be understood in order for people to be able to successfully fundraise. So family capital is like, I ran a transaction in the last couple of years for a fairly substantial family investing into fintech, where all of the pointers told them to invest $1 million into this particular fintech. But because they were given an allocation of 2 billion, they were adamant they wanted to put the full 2 million in. It was at a $100 million valuation. So now, in order for it to be a successful investment, it would have to be a $2 billion company. Now, they allocated all their capital at the beginning without following on. They'd left no reserves to follow on. So that's the immaturity side of it. But on the other side, you've got a lot of interesting and foreign people coming into the market with their VC funds, and that's educating and supporting that. So, yeah.
So exciting things happening in Saudi as well as across the region. What about, let's unpack a little bit your experience as an investor here. You've talked about the evolution, Alex. What is happening in this region that maybe isn't happening in other more mature markets? You talked about your experience in Europe and US. Where do you see as the real opportunities here in terms of startups and where you want to put your capital?
Yeah, so the ecosystem is there. Like Zainab, I'm also positive about it. I'm really enthusiastic about it, but it's true that there are still gaps. I guess there are two things happening. There are still gaps to fill as it's growing, as it's becoming more mature. I'll talk about that in a second. But also there are, basically ups, and because the market is still small and nascent, I guess it's less smooth. The growth line is more jagged. It's less smooth, and that's why you have ups and downs like you did in the, in the deal total fund value last year, coming up and down much more than in other markets. So, but in terms of gaps, so I mean, I guess the reality is that governments, I think in the neighboring countries here in the region, have done a really good job at seed acceleration and seed. And then there are wonderful earlier stage VCs like Plus VC and others that have, come and taken those companies, basically found the good ones and gotten them ready for funds like Rasmal Ventures. So up to Series A, there's a lot of funding in the market. Series B gets more complicated. Series C, there's lots of money for Series C when you can find it from corporates or families. But there isn't that institutional coverage of Series B, Series C onwards that you would find in Europe and other markets.
But
and
just to hold you there, because there's one thing that I wanted to add, because you're so right. I was having a conversation with one of the families, an LP, recently, and I asked them this very question: why? And they turned around and said, there's not enough good managers. And that was really interesting.
Managers meaning
Fund
meaning
managers.
VCs.
Yeah, fund. And they were, I'm saying that there wasn't enough.
Can I talk to them?
You know, absolutely. I think we should, right? But the point here is that they see that market as really interesting because there's a lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
And even though they have capital, they're too scared to almost allocate it because
Yeah.
they find it difficult to find the right managers to put it in. I'm talking Series A onwards, because now you're in that transition phase into private equity, right?
Yeah.
So
it's-
there's
Well,
a difference
no.
of
Private
opinion.
equity comes further. Like Series B is still well into venture capital in other markets. But just to finish answering your question, so
Yeah.
I think what's different in this market is that when a company gets to Series B, and I guess you have some in your portfolio that are getting there. We're seeing some, so they have to be creative about their financing. So either they have to reach profitability earlier, or they have to find families, albeit there are problems there. But because in Europe they would just go to the VCs that do growth capital, that do small buyouts and so forth. And here it's more difficult to do that. That's a gap that's left in the region. That is the next thing to work on, I would say.
Are you seeing that same gap, Zena? I mean, obviously you're at an earlier stage, but where do you see?
So like Alex said, like we come in early stage and then we pass on the deals to them more at a later stage. But like when it comes to like strategic investment, especially like when you mentioned the family offices or whoever it is that would come in as an LP to a fund, because they're saying where are these managers, right? Just like how we do our due diligence on those founders, we should also do our due diligence on those LPs, right? Because you mentioned earlier that there should be some sort of strategic value. In the end of the day, for us at the early stage, we want to make sure that we bring those founders and those startups at an early day to the right place for us to eventually exit those startups and return to those LPs. And for us to do that, we need to find strategic value within the whole ecosystem: the founders, the LPs, the investors, other VCs like Rasmal and others as well. So by getting the right person in, it will kind of be a domino effect because you're going to keep supporting one another. So we're seeing that, and like you said, we need to find the right bridge between all the ecosystem players and bringing them together. But it varies by stage. So like sometimes we get startups that would just apply for the sake of applying, but they're at a very late stage. So those founders need to actually do their research and target the right investors that they're looking for, because it's not just about the funding. It's about the strategic value, which we're highlighting here.
At the same time, you're both sector agnostic,
We're both sector
right?
agnostic,
So you're
yeah.
open to startups of all kinds. But do you think there's some sectors that are getting a lot of focus? AI seems to dominate a lot of discussion today. There's AI wrappers, there's marketing around AI. What is your sense of the availability of funding for different types of startups?
Yeah, so like over the past years, we've seen that one of the hottest sectors was always fintech, and that's why probably you're focusing more on fintech now. Fintech, enterprise SaaS, health tech, e-commerce, and other sectors were not being looked at, and that's why we want to be sector agnostic so that we can diversify. And then we started to see more, there's like a hype on AI, and recently we're starting to see more funds coming in and climate tech. Maybe Alex, you want to talk about climate tech as well?
Yeah.
So in terms of sectors of interest, so I mean, we try really, really hard not to fall prey to hype. I guess obviously, you know, so some sectors for whatever reason are hyped one year and, you know, unhyped another year, and another one comes up. So, you know, I guess what's really important for us is to evaluate startups and their verticals with the metrics that are appropriate to that vertical. This is what's important. And when you're a sector agnostic investor, this is really what you should do. You should know how to evaluate a marketplace company versus an AI company. And so, but both could have, you know, an amazing opportunity in their market, in their geography. And so, no, I wouldn't so much, sorry, Alex, like to comment
So
on which
there's
sectors are of interest.
There's
And just to
opportunities
finish
across
on
the board.
AI, so the way we see AI, rightly or wrongly, is as a horizontal. We actually don't see it as a vertical.
Yeah, so it fits with that sector agnostic focus. Akmal, just very briefly, because we talked a lot about startups raising capital, but there's also funds coming to this region. Of course, QIA has its own fund-of-fund programs launched last year, $1 billion. What piece of advice, or actually, let's phrase it like this, what are the common misconceptions that international VCs have when they come to this region and try and raise capital? Briefly, if you could.
Yeah. So I think startups raising capital is a very different program to funds raising capital. Because ultimately, LPs, when they're putting capital into funds, are looking for really strong money managers. And that's the common mistake I keep seeing, whether they're emerging managers or established managers. Money management is the confidence that the LPs need. And that comment I made earlier where they said there's not enough good managers, there's the number of funds that I speak to who say, yeah, but we can pick the best deals. The reality is a family office putting in $10 million into your fund is not looking at that micro level to see what deals you're going to invest into. They want an excellent money manager who can, absolutely pick good deals, but also be able to safeguard that investment to grow that investment within the thesis that they've actually said. And so that's the critical component of that. And also, I think I just want to touch upon the other side, which is even on the startup level, a lot of people that I speak to on a weekly basis will say to me, can you just tell me which family office to go into? And that's the most broad thing you can ever say coming into Saudi Arabia or any of the GCC. There are 4 segments of family offices. You have forming families, establishing families, thriving families, and established families. Anyone looking to raise capital needs to understand which type of family that they want to go to. Established families are institutions. Forming families could be offshoots of a family that's established, or they're growing. The strategy and leadership of all of these segments are so different that a startup or a fund, whether it's LP or direct investment, have to appreciate.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the point is there, due diligence. You need to actually understand the LPs that you'll be raising from if you're a fund. What about advice for startups who might be in the audience trying to raise funds? Let's come to you first, Zainab.
I mean, from an early stage, like 70% of the time, the rationale is the team, right? So in the last 2 years, we reviewed over 4,400 deals, and we invested in 70 companies in that. And usually, we're very selective because we look for teams and talent that can actually execute such a product at an early stage. So my advice would be like, if you identify a problem, make sure that you test the market, test the product as much as you can and get feedback from the customers so that you can build upon that product and expand and grow bigger. And at the same time, build a good relationship between the investors you speak to. Even if they reject you, don't have a negative attitude towards them. Keep a positive relationship with them. Share the updates as you go so that they can see your progress. So like, for example, we have a company that has been sharing their updates with us on a monthly basis for the last 2 years. And because we've seen their progress, they were too early at the time. We've seen their progress. We reached a stage where we saw how much milestones they actually achieved, and we actually ended up investing in them. So if someone rejects you, don't just think of it as a final rejection. Continue building a positive relationship with them, because you never know, even if they don't end up investing, this ecosystem, people like to talk, so it will probably reach somewhere else. So try to maintain that positive relationship.
Great tip. Alex, what advice do you have for founders in the audience, maybe at that slightly later stage that are trying to raise capital?
Yeah, I always have the same answer to that question, but just to support Zainab about, well, reputational issues that can arise from the way you interact with the VCs. Actually, in my investment background and track record, the best deals have been the longest closings. So from the time that I met the company to the time that I invested, those have actually been the best deals. Coincidence or statistical probability, I don't know, but all this to say that when it takes time, the founder should work with the funding source and be accommodating and be interested and remain engaged. My advice to founders is always the same. It's present a realistic plan. There's no sense in presenting the sky if you don't think that you can reach it. So whatever you're presenting has to be grounded in reality, and it has to be realistic. And then when the relationship evolves to investment and you have VCs on your board, realize your plan, because the pain that comes from being way under what you promised your investors and your board to do is very, very significant. So
I'm afraid we're out of time, but we can all catch up with you after the fact. Just give me a round of applause for the fantastic panel, and enjoy the rest of Web Summit.